I'm as surprised to be here as I think you are to see me here. I asked backstage if I could have some whiskey up here to cool my nerves, but apparently that's against the rules here, so they gave me this fun bottle of normal-ass water. So I think it's fitting to start my talk with a deep sense of crippling sobriety and disappointment. Let's see if I can get my slides to work correctly. I'm on a blank slide. This is so fitting that I'm screwing up slides already for this talk. I'll explain later why this is so complicated. You don't see my awful Linux up here, so we've got to do it this way. So I'm glad a lot of you could come and join me up here. You've taken a lot of time out of your day of handcrafting artisanal Linux containers or whatever I actually don't know what any of you do. But I've been thinking a lot about why everything is just the worst for probably the last 5 or 6 years, and I've been trying to discover what it is that makes software and hardware and operations and development and all these things just suck so unabashedly. And I've done where you ask why a bunch of times, like a toddler. I've done that. I've done some root cause analysis to try to figure out what it is that makes everything just awful, just unabashedly awful. And I haven't come up with a single root cause. There's no one particular reason that I've thought of why everything is just awful. But I have sort of partitioned things out. I've bucket sorted things, and I've figured a couple of general areas of what makes things awful. And obviously, number one on the list is software. Software is the biggest reason for any sadness at least from my observations. Software is the root cause of all of our problems. And when I think about it, and I did my research, I did a lot of prep work leading up to this, believe it or not. This train wreck you see before you took a lot of effort on my part. But the sort of most honorable mentions that I could come up with for just awful software, I don't want to name names, but there's one or two that come to mind for awfulness in the software space. I thought it would be really mean to call out one project in particular. So I did do some research, and did you know in the last 2 years, this piece of software has averaged a single vulnerability every month for the past 24 consecutive months? Woo! We did it. I'm just messing with you. That's not true. It's actually been 2 software vulnerabilities for the past 24 months, every single month. And that's pretty messed up. And that's what's protecting you from GHCQ or whatever, the NSA, et cetera. And it's not just OpenSSL. I mean, that piece of software, if you really look back at all the CVEs over the past 30 days, there's numerous pieces of software that make up our world that have all been compromised or are all vulnerable and have caused us strife in the last 30 days. And when I was doing my research for this, I was actually really surprised at how many pretty logos everybody has, which gives you, I guess, it gives you something cool to look at when you're getting pwned. But they're all very nice. They clearly spent a lot of time and effort coming up with a nice logo instead of securing their piece of shit software. But as sort of users, we all use these pieces of software, and we feel this deep, bitter betrayal whenever we get compromised or we have to roll out CVEs or 0 days. And we've built out this big tower of Hanoi out of straw and bullshit, and then we feel so victimized when it falls over upon us. And software is just the worst. I don't know if you've spent much time with software, but it sucks. So I think it's safe to say we can all probably agree that software is awful. And what better thing to do with software than build more software to manage that previously aforementioned shitty software? And if we agree that software is the worst, the right solution is to come up with different pieces of software to paper mache over all of that underlying pieces of software. And all of these tools that we've developed in this industry, we use to sort of abstract away the underlying horror of a modern operating system. And I use modern, obviously, loosely, because between yum and apt and IP tables and whatever the hell Windows people use, and shells, both born again, Z and power, like all of this stuff just sort of glosses over these underlying pieces of crap, which does give you some really interesting stuff that you can do. We've built a lot of really cool stuff with this fundamentally crappy software, but we use it to deliver more broken, crappy software without any validation whatsoever as quickly as possible to our production networks, which is really fun. The industry is really big and passionate about continuously delivering downtime to customers these days, which I really like. And there's no intrinsic sense of correctness in any of this nonsense. There's nothing, like, the only way that you know any of this stuff is doing what you're expecting it to do is if you check it over and over again, and you build out monitoring systems and different test frameworks and all of these sort of globbed on pieces of mud to make sure that everything's sort of kind of maybe doing what you kind of expect it to do. And this is all really important stuff because we're applying software to all of these different domains, and we're trying to fix all of these problems with all of these different pieces of software, all these different arrows going one way or the other, and we're calling it microservices. And it's like we took, as an industry, we used to have one big monolithic piece of shit application, and what's going to be better is if we take that monolithic piece of shit, big, interdependent, tightly coupled application, and let's break it out into a lot of different tightly coupled, interdependent applications and call that microservices, and that's going to be better. And by microservices, I obviously mean a mesh of containers that are implicitly linked and interdependent because, hey, why not? And that's so much better than what we used to have, which was the one big, stupid Rails application on MySQL because everything lives on MySQL, or the one awful PHP application on MySQL, or if you're unfortunate, the Tomcat or the Java EE, whatever's on MySQL, or going way old school, Perl on MySQL. What I'm really trying to say here is MySQL is like a despair black hole whose sadness gravity just ruins everything around it, and you cannot escape it. That's really what I'm trying to say here. But so we had these big monolithic applications, and we said, screw that. Let's put a lot of different crappy applications, and let's tie them all together, and that's going to be awesome. And now each development team can come up with new and innovative ways to introduce single points of failure into our production infrastructures. And underneath all of those different little services, we're going to use different data services because we all love dealing with data tier applications like MySQL or Cassandra or React or, sorry, I wasn't going to name names of pieces of software. But we introduce all of these different little data tier services underneath that all have their different monitoring and logging and resiliency and write requirements, hardware requirements. And we deploy a bunch of those because a bunch is more good than anything fewer than a bunch. And then we're surprised when things fall over. And the only way that you sort of make sense of all of these different microservices is to implement sane log management. Like, we have all of these wonderful applications streaming errors to disk as fast as they possibly can. And we need a way to ignore and just stuff those logs somewhere. And so we already know that microservices is the way of the future. So let's solve logs with microservices. That way, we can, instead of filling up our disks with a bunch of bullshit nonsense, we can aggregate and collect all of that log information that no one actually really cares about and ship it off and spend countless CPU cycles determining whether or not we can show a graph in the boardroom or not of errors from production. And that's better. But I actually came up with this awesome patent pending. I will accept venture capital after the talk for my awesome log management solution, where you take, if you just assume that no one's going to look at the logs, and no one is, let's be honest, no one's looking at all of these error logs, just put this nice little piece of software. We're solving software problems with more software. Just put this in a cron tab, and all your problems with logs go away, which is really cool to solve that software problem with a little bit of more software. And I really wish I could say that monitoring was as easy to fix as logging. I don't have a lot of really interesting solutions for monitoring, but we've already clearly seen the problem, or the solution, excuse me, to all of our application problems is more services, and the solution to our log management problem is obviously more services, so let's solve our monitoring problem with more services, because that's going to make everything better. If there's one thing, and I'm being honest here, if there's one thing that you can take away from my talk is that if you have to solve a problem, solve it with more than one service, because that's better. Just more services is always better. But we've got this monitoring system that's now so incredibly complex that we have to add another monitoring system around it to make sure that the first monitoring system that's making sure all of our services are working is actually working itself. And you quickly sort of stumble into this never-ending downward spiral and Russian dolls of monitoring systems to where you would have to, obviously you can't just have that monitoring system not be monitored. So let's add another monitoring system ad infinitum. And that way we'll actually be able to be sure that our services are all up when they're supposed to be. And that all leads me, of course, to hashtag DevOps. I'm going to take a little drink real quick. I actually really like adding hashtags to things because a hashtag is a really quick, pro tip, hashtags are a really quick and easy way to take any word or phrase and completely deprive it of its original meaning or value. And by the way, you can learn more about hashtag DevOps at Deepak's keynote tomorrow morning. I promised I would bring that up. But hashtag DevOps is about organizational change whereby a vendor is going to sell you a tool that's going to give you DevOps. Like your CDW rep's going to call you, which is, I don't know, the marketing around this is just mind-blowing. But like your rep is going to call you and be like, I heard you needed 3 DevOps. We've got some DevOps back here in the warehouse, and we'll be happy to sell you some of that DevOps. And it's all just so ridiculous. However, like, vendors do that. Like, all of these things, like, that's what vendors do. They sell you crap whether or not they actually understand the crap that you're being sold and how it actually works. So if you have a vendor that's willing to sell you DevOps, I'm willing to bet they're also going to sell you Agile, because Agile is a little box that you sell and deliver to people. And I really think you could look at DevOps, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about how to phrase this. It's not a tool. It's not a series of tools. But it's a lot of honest people who want to change their situation and change the way that they're working with a lot of other people in their organization. And it's not really about systems administration, and it's not really about service delivery. It's about how fundamentally all of these different stakeholders in an organization recognize and pull their heads out of their respective asses and realize that they're all trying to ship value to their customers. And you can't buy that off the shelf. Like, DevOps is like happiness. It's something that comes from within. You can't buy it, which is why I actually don't have happiness anyway. And anyways, so the sort of introspection that's going on with DevOps as a movement is happening across the board, which I actually think is really cool, because if you look at our monitoring situation, instead of having some ridiculous like SSH to a thing, check to see if the process is running. If HTTPD is running, then the site's online. Sure, let's give ourselves a pat on the back that's working. We've got these very sort of dynamic environments now where services are coming and going, and we need something more modern and event-driven. And there's people that are removing this sort of old, crufty nonsense and thinking of new evented ways to solve our monitoring problems. And let's be honest, monitoring sucks has been like a thing for as long as there's been monitoring, but it used to suck a whole lot more. Like, going from shitty to tolerably mediocre is a huge improvement, and I think we should recognize that that's really valuable as an industry. And rapidly identifying and sort of surfacing useful telemetry isn't just isolated to monitoring. If we look at those logs, it used to be that logs were pretty much useless. You had applications spamming, I can't reach this host, I can't reach this host, to syslog over and over and again. And no one really saw those but operations people, so who gives a shit? And that used to be the sort of modus operandi of a lot of organizations. But now we don't tolerate grepping through crap on multiple hosts. We want a modern system that, even though we do have all of these awful pieces of software spamming logs and throwing so much noise into Elasticsearch and making it difficult, for every 1,000 log lines, there's probably a log line that's one servicing, hey, so I lost quorum. Quorum's pretty important to what I'm trying to do here. If you could get on that, that would be great. And it used to be you would just miss that in the sea of pain that was logs just being spewed out. And now we have tools that give us the ability to find those sort of valuable needles in the haystack. And making log management, I would say, no longer a nuisance or a huge pain in the ass, and changing logs to be like, this is any sort of log management infrastructure like that is a hallmark of a more mature organization. That's really valuable, and I think that enables different organizations and to build up different services and start to build out this sort of constellation, to borrow the space metaphor, which is clearly a theme, this constellation of different services working together. We need to be able to pick out the signal from the noise from all of that stuff, because it's no longer acceptable in a development context to say, everybody, you must use Java EE and Oracle or get the hell out. Like, that's not a thing. You've got to use the right tool for the right job. And so you might have one team that's like super old school, or I guess new school, Perl 6 is new school, building stuff in Perl, and another one that's building stuff and deploying on Tomcat. And you might have a third team who no one really likes in the organization, so they gave them the PHP application, but at least those developers can look down on the developers maintaining the Rails application, and you can give all of these different developers an ability to deliver their software without, a developer going over and saying, Mr. Ops, can you please deploy my shit? And then the Mr. Ops having to deal with their bullshit once it explodes in production. We can shove that onto the developers, which to me, that's progress. But we could go even one step further, and we could say, so long as all of your bullshit applications meet this contract that says, here's where your logging endpoint is, here's how you should be logging your error logs and your et ceteras, here's how we're going to monitor your thing. Hell, you can just put it in this box. I don't give a shit what's in it. Just put it in this box, and I will help get it to production and deliver it, but you are going to be on the hook for everything after that. And that's pretty transformative for developers, because they're no longer asking for forgiveness, and they can sort of build out microservices with whatever tools that they need to build to solve the problem. And to me, at least, that's really what the discussion around microservices should be. Don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me to ship this piece of software. Don't tell me to write a thing in Java or a thing in PHP. Definitely don't tell me that. But define standards for me to where I can implement an application and I can deliver an application that's going to plug into your infrastructure, and it's going to log to the right places, and it's going to be monitored in the right ways, and it's going to discover other services. And that, to me, is really what is, I would say, exciting and positive about microservices, which gives operations personnel the ability to sort of focus on their infrastructure and providing these base level services instead of dealing with these stupid developers and their stupid deployments and always asking stupid questions. And so you can start to incorporate all of these different tools to manage your infrastructure to where you're no longer worrying about the application itself, but you're worrying about your infrastructure and how we're going to provide these different services and leveling everything up. And there are a few different tools to do this, but the one positive thing that I see with all of these different efforts, they're all trying to accomplish something slightly different, they're going in slightly different directions, is an underlying desire to make the system more deterministic. Like, guess and check operations can't work anymore. And using all of these different tools and sort of making this this discussion in the industry about what is the correct state of a piece of software running on a machine, whether it's virtual or physical, leads to really interesting efforts like Nixos, where there's a lot of effort going from top to bottom in the distribution to say, screw all this shit that existed before, I need to be able to reliably and reproducibly deploy, manage, and operate software. And that means that configuration management can start to do really interesting things, and we can start to build interesting abstractions once we sort of scrape away all the cruft and non-deterministic nonsense underneath, which, of course, I mean, don't get me wrong. No amount of configuration management is going to make software inherently better. I'm not sure if this is really a thing that can be done, but I would say everybody here's credit and elsewhere in the ecosystem, all of these pieces of software which are so important to our day-to-day lives, these are all open source pieces of software, which gives us a fighting chance to sort of manage the patch lifecycle around them, because after everything here got pwned, within a day or two, almost all of them had released updates, which is not something you see from other not to be named closed source distribution or operating system vendors. But all of these projects get updated. And so software allows us to sort of recover from our own stupidity, which is really, really powerful. And if you take a survey of a lot of these projects, a lot of them suffer from the same sort of underlying buffer overruns, underruns, whatever, a lot of the same vulnerabilities, to where there's also other interesting work like Rust, to where developers are saying, what if we just remove whole classes of problems that are affecting our software? So not only is log management and everything else getting better, software is actually leveling up as well, which to me is really, really exciting, because even fundamental pieces of our infrastructure are getting updated. Like, I think it was last year Heartbleed came out, and everyone sort of collectively said, oh shit, it turns out we need developers to work on this software to fix the things that suck in this software, because otherwise we're going to have Heartbleed and shit, I can't remember all the other different, that's how many vulnerabilities. They all have their own special bespoke names, but there's a lot. And that to me is really, really compelling. And that's really, really powerful and positive. We don't have to, we can admit that these things suck, right? But we have the ability to fork and update and modify and deploy all of these different pieces of software that affect our day-to-day lives, which means that you and thousands of your peers have the ability to fix almost all of the things that suck that affect you on a day-to-day basis. And you know, if I'm honest with myself, it's super easy to be negative. Like, there's such a huge corpus of shitty software out there that it is so easy for me to come up with snarky quips and things to be negative about. But that's not really super constructive. What I think is actually really hard, a lot harder than making fun of this shit, is acknowledging that all of these things suck and still trying to improve it. Like coming into the office on a Monday and saying, look, things are kind of fucked right now. Let's all fix this. That takes a lot of chutzpah, I think is the word. But all of you work in this sort of high-stress, dynamic, rapidly changing environment where, yes, there's a lot of problems underneath it, but you are also empowered to fix a lot of those problems. And I get really excited and I'm impassioned about this topic, because I see all of these people here trying to improve things in an industry that is endemic with pessimism, and I'm part of the problem. I'm willing to admit that. Endemic with pessimism, but also really underappreciated in everybody's sort of respective organizations. And I like to poke fun at sort of our mutual pain and frustration, but I have a tremendous amount of respect for anyone who can look at this huge stack of bullshit that affects our day-to-day lives and say, I'm going to go fix some of that. That takes guts, and that I respect quite a bit. And as you know, Luke mentioned this morning, things have improved over the past, 10 years, and things are certainly going to improve over the next 10 years, which is really cool. And you're all here ostensibly to learn and to improve things. And if no one else around you is going to say it, I'm proud of you, and I'm proud of that effort, and I'm proud to be part of this community where people look bullshit in the eye and say, this needs to be better, and here's some ideas on how to make it better. And I think that's a really great characteristic of this community. Yeah. So I'm sorry I don't have as many jokes. It's actually really difficult to stand in front of a mostly empty auditorium and make jokes. But I hope, in the coming months, years, weeks, whatever, I hope you all keep laughing with me at ourselves. And please, please, for the love of God, keep making things better, because there's so much that can be improved. And I'm going to end a little bit early. I'm not going to take questions. Surprise, surprise. And I look forward to meeting a lot of you at drinks later, but we should probably go do the drinks thing. So thanks for your time.